This is Twit.
Well, you know, when we invite our next guest on the show, he usually is the one to take it away. The Electronic Entertainment Expo, aka E3, kicked off almost a week ago. The first E3, by the way, since 2019, because 2020 happened, and we all know what happened in 2020. So it's been a cavalcade, if I can use that word, of game announcements. Joining us to pick the highlights is Sam Miskovich from Ars Technica. Welcome back, Sam.
Well, hello, everybody. Are you just expecting me to yammer the entire time about video games, which I am passionate about? Because if so, I've got yammering for you.
So I'm just going to say the word video game, and then you got 15 minutes. No, I'm just kidding.
Listen, I'm interested in having a conversation because E3, we put in scare quotes, is confusing this year. It didn't happen in a convention hall. And therefore, I kind of wonder how you see it from the other side of maybe not following video games intently. And I'm happy to kind of talk people through what the heck a summer full of video game hype and announcements looks like this year.
Well, E3, like in years past, is usually a very experiential thing, right? It's an event that you go to. I have to imagine. Now, I've not attended E3 as a journalist. I'm not a game journalist. That's why we bring you on. But you've been to E3 in the past, and I have to imagine E3 in the past is very hands-on, right? It's like, here are all these games, and you get to get your first kind of look and understand these games on a deeper level. How different was that this year? Because as with everything, you know, the last year and a half, it's basically online. It's a very different approach. Did that really impact your ability to report about it?
It's interesting because video game companies really want to control how their brand new fancy games are perceived. So when you go to a giant expo hall like in Los Angeles for E3 normally, you have this mix of things you can play and things you can't. And they want everything to seem like it's done and it's playable and it's real. But one of the most famous examples of that not quite coming true was Cyberpunk 2077, which I went into one of those behind closed doors things where a person was holding a controller and seeming to play the game. Turned out it was all BS. We all found out years later through all the Cyberpunk news reports for the past 6 months that was hogwash. They faked a bunch of it, and the final game turned out to be very broken and very different. So there's that now we kind of know for sure. If you only see it as a YouTube video, well, we don't know how truly real or playable it is. On the other hand, the playable stuff that you would normally get, maybe the smaller games, we got a lot less of that. You know, Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo, the three biggest names, didn't come out and say, hey, you know, you can't meet up with us in person because of the convention center being closed. So here's a different way to play games. Now, other games companies swooped in to kind of fill in those shoes. But interestingly, this year, Ubisoft in particular used to be very good at saying, hey, get onto Parsec, a streaming service, and you can play our unfinished game on the cloud. And it's, you know, there's some asterisks and there's some caveats that it's not completely done. And this year, Ubisoft particularly skipped that opportunity, which I thought was interesting. And the fact they had a pretty meager showing of no Assassin's Creed, no Watch Dogs. A lot of the series that you're used to from Ubisoft didn't get annualized announcements. So it was kind of funky. But now I suppose I'm in the same shoes as most everyone else of all being able to say, well, we didn't get to play that thing. We merely got to watch it. But there's still stuff that looks like real games, stuff that was a real game that we can talk about today.
Yeah, well, and you were talking a little bit about Ubisoft. They're the ones behind Mario plus Rabbids, right? And that ties into kind of the Nintendo side of things. So is that a title that you're looking forward to? I know that there was a Metroid title that looked really awesome to me, just purely because from a nostalgic standpoint, that's the era of the 2D platformer era of Metroid is really the one that speaks to me. But what stood out to you there?
Well, Nintendo, I think, had a really interesting showing because they previously announced a bunch of stuff. We knew that they were working on Breath of the Wild 2. We knew they were working on Splatoon 3, a continuation of that very interesting kid-friendly shooter series. We knew they were working on Bayonetta 3, which is this very hardcore gamer slash things around kind of game. A few others. And so we were wondering what they would show. And this year is an interesting mix of enough games per month, sort of letting us know, yeah, we're still putting stuff out. But Japanese game studios in particular, based on what I followed, were really, really crunched by the realities of COVID. I can't speak exactly to what's different between Eastern and Western game development in terms of how that stuff worked. But we were all kind of curious how all these different game companies would emerge from that and say, here's what we have for the end of 2021 after so many months of being stuck in home. And so we only got a tiny taste of Breath of the Wild 2. Looks really cool. It looks like a game because it looks very much like the last game. It doesn't look souped up or faked, and it adds a city in the sky. So where the last game saw Link really build up a stamina meter to crawl over all of these giant mountains. And that was the big gameplay hook, was, working up the strength and ability to sort of climb and clamber around this giant world and sort of figure out through middle of the game puzzles just how to get through the world. And now that goes into the sky. So there's floating through different cloud cities and having a much more intense glider, even a special power where Link could turn into water and go from a ceiling to a floor, go between like a little cliffside and flip up that way, and other little abilities. But that was just a very meager taste. And then we were told 2022. And then Nintendo also has a Legend of Zelda Game & Watch, which was Game Boy before Game Boy. It was the early 80s toy that really blew up in Japan. That was sort of a combination calculator game system. And that'll have 3 classic Zelda games and a watch and a little dinky Game & Watch mini game. And that's going to be sort of the big 35th anniversary Zelda release this year, along with a remaster of a Wii game called Skyward Sword. So 35th anniversary for Zelda, in my opinion, didn't quite get the big hits that I think a lot of super fans were hoping for. There's a lot to go through in terms of what Nintendo released, and we have a bunch of that on Ars Technica. And by released, I mean announced and shown off. But Metroid Dread is back to 2D. And that title's interesting because Metroid Dread was the name of a game that was hinted to and then canceled and then brought back to life and then canceled and is finally back. And there were rumors and hints about all this, and Nintendo denied it. And then this week, finally, there was a long presentation where they admitted that they'd started the game twice and then killed it as a sort of 2D game. And that was in the mid-2000s when 3D was ruling and Metroid Prime was doing very well. Well, we know Metroid Prime 4 is in development. It's been delayed. We don't know when it's coming out. That game, as far as we know, was rebooted and handed off to a different developer midway through. So Metroid Dread's going to have to fill us in for now, and that's made by a company called Mercury Steam, who already made a Metroid game a few years ago that was for the 3DS. And they've clearly charmed Nintendo enough to be handed what's considered an official canon sequel. In fact, they're calling it the end of the mainline Metroid series. It will end that story. They're calling it Metroid 5 unofficially in terms of the 2D Metroid games. So that's a lot to hand to a third-party developer. And that's showing Nintendo's increasing willingness to work with partners, for example, with Ubisoft on that Mario and Rabbids collaboration. Like, Nintendo is willing more now than ever to say, hey, fans of Nintendo from the West, here you go. You love the series so much, you do it. So I think that's a really cool move on their part. Ultimately, there was a lot of random stuff that ranges between hardcore and family friendly. There's a series called Advance Wars, which is a strategy game for the Game Boy Advance, and that's getting re-released for the Switch. And I assume it's going to sell like gangbusters, because what Game Boy Advance install base was nothing compared to how crazy people are about the Switch. And so Nintendo has that room to wiggle around and release things that were big back in the day and remastered it and hitting a whole new audience now. And then there's a Pokemon re-release, a remaster coming out in November. And they didn't even talk about it at E3 because it's just Pokemon, and that's going to do fine. So Nintendo's doing fine, but not everything that we super nerds were dreaming of being unveiled and released as a trailer this week.
Now, what were you dreaming of from Microsoft? Because it sounds like everybody is smitten with the news from the event about Xbox Game Pass and kind of the power and breadth of that catalog. What did you think?
I mean, I said this last year, and I'm saying it again this year. Xbox Game Pass is the game of the show, meaning you're spending $15 a month if you're paying the full price. And there are ways to get discounts and bundles and free trials and things like that to get an incredible allotment of new interesting games every month. And they went on a crazy acquisition spree in the past few years. And the fruits of that are really starting to show, because basically every month there's a big game this year coming out on Game Pass for Xbox consoles, including Microsoft Flight Simulator, which was previously computer only, Psychonauts 2, Age of Empires 4 for computer, Halo Infinite at some point this holiday season. I don't have the entire list in front of me right now, but basically there's a lot of diversity in genre. And there's also a bunch of third-party games where Microsoft goes to people and says, hey, here's some money. Please be on Game Pass on day and date. The idea being you don't even have to sort of wait. You get the subscription service and all of the big stuff, all of the cool stuff, all of the Microsoft-specific stuff is there day one. Compare that to some of Sony's subscription offerings, particularly PlayStation Now, which holds a lot of their biggest games off, where they say, pay the $60 or nowadays $70 at launch to get access to our biggest games. Oh, but use our subscription service for smaller fry fare. And Microsoft is on the other side saying, here's everything. Here's all of our big stuff. If you just want to be up to date with the biggest Xbox things, get on Game Pass. So that show of force was really big. I was really hoping for more. You asked what I hoped for. And Halo Infinite, to me, came out a little shyer than I had expected. I thought that we were going to see a little bit more of what the traditional campaign would look like. And I don't say single player for that, because sometimes that's for co-op, where you and some friends can all team up and Master Chief your way through a big landscape. And last year, its reveal got so criticized that they delayed the game a full year. Well, they're not delaying it, apparently. It's coming out holiday of this year, though we don't know exactly when. And a lot of people are guessing that they're waiting for the newest Call of Duty to get a release date before they pick their date, because they want to space it out. There's already a new Battlefield. There's going to be a new Call of Duty. And so Halo's squeezing in on the shooty shoot. So I'm not shocked about that. But they didn't show what that campaign stuff will look like. And if you've been playing Halo a long time, that's what you think about for Halo. You think about teaming up with friends on an epic quest against very smart artificial intelligence bad guys. They did show a bunch of the online versus mode stuff, and that's all free to play. However you want to play it, you can get on there free to play day and date. You don't even have to be on Game Pass to access it. And then there's an additional battle pass that's all cosmetics only. They're very clear. If you just want to play, if you don't want to spend a single penny, every mode, every gun, every feature will be included. Wow. That's huge. And that's going to bring a lot of people in. And I imagine they're going to find a way for Game Pass to also be part of the perks where, if you're part of Game Pass or you buy the campaign content or something, you get a little more for multiplayer, maybe an outfit. I don't know. But that's a big deal. And the other big thing that Microsoft pushed right before E3 was cloud. They're very bullish on saying we want it to be easy and useful for you to get on the cloud. And I break that down a lot at Ars Technica, but the bottom line is they're getting a lot of things right that Stadia got wrong. In particular, Game Pass. If you pay for the ultimate flavor of Game Pass, which is $15 a month, all the games are just there. You don't have to buy them a la carte. You don't have to worry about whether the service is going to get canceled in a couple of years and your whole library goes away. It's just that monthly giant buffet style with a lot of content that's immediately available. And their cloud stuff works on a lot of devices. And one thing they announced was if you have an older Xbox One, they're going to release an app by the year's end that lets you dip into the cloud and lets you see whether your connection is up to snuff and how good it feels. And I'll tell you, I know a lot of people who just have an old Xbox One and they don't have to get rid of it. They can just attach it as a very focused cloud device and have it work and tell their kids, you want to play the newest games? You don't have to buy a new box. Here you go. Wow. And that's going to lock a lot of people into Xbox in an interesting way. I think it's genius. Everything they did from a business side is genius.
That's awesome. That's super compelling. Awesome. Okay, so that's a value pack there. God, there's so much to talk about, and we don't really have enough time to talk about everything. If you had to name a couple of the indie titles that you're super excited about, what would those be?
Man, I'll tell you, the thing I'm going to suggest is go to Steam on PC or go to Xbox if you've got an Xbox console. They have the biggest E3-style demo slews right now. The Idea at Xbox Festival that's on Xbox right now has about 40 games, includes something called Tunic, which looks a lot like Legend of Zelda. It's been teased for years. It's the most playable this game has ever been. It's a very long, meaty demo that's closer to Zelda, but with a hint of the challenge and weirdness of Dark Souls, but not hard. It's really compelling. Tunic is that one. And Steam has something called Steam Next Fest, which has 700 game demos. That's way too many.
Wow.
I have a feature at Ars Technica that picks out some of my favorites, and I'll just shout one out that's a total trip. It's called Lake. It is a combination of Gilmore Girls and the arcade game Paperboy. meaning it's very slow, it's dialogue driven, it's not challenging, but it's this very empathetic story about coming back to a town you once lived in to deliver mail. And it's just a trip. I look at that and I go, video games are so different now than they were for me when I was a kid. Just the way that this story tells, the story lands as you control this very slow mail truck. It's not Grand Theft Auto. But the way that you have to do these basic tasks and talk to townspeople, it's unbelievable. Never seen anything like it. And if you want more gamer stuff, then there's a game called Death Trash, which is where you're in a post-apocalyptic landscape and you're killing zombies and you're figuring out why a robot society has taken over and humans have become secondhand. It's a trip. So like those are just two examples on Steam Next Fest of crazy, weird, out of nowhere games that indies are doing. And you can play them as opposed to Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony not letting you play anything this year.
The combo I never thought I'd ever hear in my entire life is it's a game that mixes Gilmore Girls and Paperboy.
I love it.
Yeah, but I'm super compelled to check that out. I wish we had time to talk about Elden Ring, the trailer, namely because it seems like everybody names it as a big highlight. Would you agree?
Yeah, Elden Ring is the most gamer game of E3 2021. And it's coming out next year, and it combines Dark Souls and George R.R. Martin, meaning you can ride a horse around and it can jump really high in the air, and there's dragons, fire, magic, swords. It just looks like a darned video game, and it looks big, and it doesn't look like a BS trailer. It looks real, and I really hope that we get to play it sometime before the end of the year in one way or another, but it's not coming out until 2022. But it was one of those things that reminds you of why we strap in and watch all these game trailers and get into the hype stuff, because it looks sick, but whether it's going to be as good as it looks remains to be seen.